Good evening, I'm Ari Melber. Thanks for joining our extended special live coverage from tonight's Democratic presidential debate. We already have highlights coming in as the debate, you may have heard, is almost wrapping up, and there's a lot to unpack and discuss. So tonight, let me tell you what's going to go down. We're going to have a full round of live post-game analysis right here on MSNBC, including Brian Williams coming up and Chris Matthews live from Detroit. Now, what's been going on? Well, the candidates have been running right up until this debate in Michigan, including Beto O'Rourke, literally on a run in Detroit this morning where he was swatting away some questions. Meanwhile, Pete Buttigieg was forcing more on Inside Time, and he posted a picture of himself deep in prep, or at least the appearance thereof. Elizabeth Warren campaigning last night in Toledo, Ohio, where she took her 40,000th selfie photograph with supporters. You can see the excitement there. They're clearly keeping track. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders was just huddling with musician Cardi B yesterday in Detroit. This was a picture she posted from it. She mentioned that she was asking him questions that she got from some of her fans around the nation. Now, their discussion's not out yet. Cardi did also post a message, though, today telling her fans, make sure you watch the debate. So everybody has been in on this. Now, the Democratic field is obviously big. It's more diverse than many other years. And there's a lot of daylight between candidates on policy, and that's especially true at the top of this field. But even with all the differences between these candidates, you know one thing that everyone at the top has in common, everyone who appears to be a very viable potential Democratic nominee, from Bernie to Booker to Biden to Buttigieg to even candidates who don't have the letter B at the start of their name? The top tier candidates have released their tax returns already. And that's typical. Every presidential candidate who's been in the major party races since Richard Nixon has put out tax returns during their bid. It's one of these things that American electorates have come to expect from anyone who is open to the vetting to potentially be president. It's seen as something that we all know is basic transparency and disclosure, and it's happened in both parties until, of course, Donald Trump totally shattered that tradition, refused to release any tax returns whatsoever. Now, Democrats in Congress, as you may know tonight, they're still in the middle of an escalation politically, legislatively, and legally in this battle with Trump to get his taxes. They invoked a law that allows them to ask. The president then used his own IRS administrator to refuse to comply with what seemed like a pretty straightforward legal rule. So now they are seizing on that to sue the president and try to pry loose his taxes through the third branch of government. Meanwhile, the president's lawyers were actually in federal court just this week with all this other stuff going on. They're fighting a state-level effort from New York that would provide the president's state taxes, which would still show more than he has, to the federal Congress. So whatever happens in this current legal battle, you have the president breaking with norms and opening the way for a lot of other candidates, frankly, in maybe either party, to follow his new norm. Don't release your taxes, and maybe you'll be fine politically, at least in the short run. Now, there are states that are trying to fix this. This is an important story tonight because there's new movements to pass these type of laws that actually would require candidates to cough up their tax returns. Now, in some states, it's just been talk, it's been brainstorming until now. This is a brand new story you may not have heard about because it happened today. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, signing into this state law, a bill which doesn't have a lot of wiggle room. It requires all presidential candidates, and they mean all presidential candidates, to release 5 years of income taxes or, and this is why it hits them where it counts, or get kicked off the ballot in the delegate-rich state of California. Now, this is the first law of its kind to be put anywhere on the books in the nation, and it would appear to be a direct response to, yes, the obvious Trumpy reality of a president in office running for re-election without ever releasing tax returns. The president hasn't really faced any direct repercussions for this secrecy. Well, maybe that would change here because this law in California is not just for the future down the road, future presidents, et cetera. No, it would clearly, in the way it's written, apply to this president as well. So if it stays on the books, if it's not kicked out by some legal challenge or court, it could keep the current president, yes, off the California ballot in the year 2020. And joining us now is Gavin Newsom, Democratic governor of the state of California. Thanks for doing this.
Good to be here with you, Ari.
What does this new law do?
Well, it simply provides a responsibility for anybody who wants to place their name on the primary presidential ballot to release 5 years of tax returns. Also requires the governor of the state of California to do the same. And I think it's appropriate, not just under the circumstances, but because norms have been challenged since 1973. Every elected president has provided for their tax returns. We're now in a position where we feel California needs to lead in the absence of federal government requiring the same of the current president and potentially future presidents.
You mentioned the current president. You say norms have been challenged. So this is targeting Donald Trump?
No, I mean, no more than it's targeting me. If I choose to run for re-election, I would be required to do the same. It's politically neutral. It's party neutral. Every presidential candidate, everybody we see up there on the presidential debate stage would be required to do the same.
Then why not wait until this controversy is over? You could set this up for after 2020. I mean, it does appear to be in timing and in its inflection going after the thing he hasn't released. I take your point that, as lawyers would say, it's facially neutral, it's technically neutral, but I think a lot of people watching, and some people might even cheer this, depending on the politics, but people watching would say it does look like it's going after Trump.
Well, look, bottom line, we believe in transparency. You can question the timing. I should note there was an effort a couple of years ago in California to do the same. The fact is we need to lead on the issue of conflicts. We need to lead on making sure the American people know if individuals in positions like mine or the President of the United States himself is self-dealing. Conflicts of interest are real. We have a president that shouldn't be concerned about this because he made a commitment to the people of this country. He promised on the campaign trail he would release his tax returns. So this may be much to do about nothing, but I think it's the right thing to do.
And in terms of how the state law works, this is for the primaries. It's not, as I understand it, for the general election. Is that right?
That's correct. And again, this was supported, or not again, but should be pointed out, it was supported by every Democrat in the California legislature. There's been a total, I think, of 18 states that have attempted to do this. Some are still in the process in motion. This is not unique to California, but this is the first that landed on any governor's desk. I ask that it be amended to include me or any future governor, because I think the issue of transparency should not be exclusive to the President of the United States. It should also be held to the account of people like myself who run the 5th largest government in the world.
Yeah, no, and you're in charge of clearly a very important big state. The other thing here is the politics, which I recognize in your role as governor. You're trying to be as fair and sort of broad as possible. But I think people know California is not a state that Donald Trump generally needs to win in the general election or any Republican in the current mix of things. So if he just sort of boycotts this and isn't worried about that in the primary or the general, does that make this ultimately mostly symbolic?
Yeah, I mean, if that's what he chooses to do, he can choose to do the right thing. Can choose to do what he promised you and everybody watching he would do after this audit is complete. And that is provide us that information.
You think he was lying about the audit? We've talked to a lot of experts who say that defense never really washed.
No, I mean, it's rather absurd. I don't know. Last I checked with the IRS, I think there's a 3-year limitation on audits, but this may be some extraordinary exception. But the fact is, he made that commitment. He made that promise. He should be held to account in that respect. Look, at the end of the day, since 1973, I'll remind you, in 1973, it was Richard Nixon who said the American people deserve to know whether, quote unquote, their president is a crook. Every other elected official has done this. Norms are being challenged left and right. And it requires a response. It requires us to step up, and it requires us to assert ourselves. And again, this should be done at the federal level. I'm not naive about that. But in the absence of that, states like California will assert themselves.
Right.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.